Yes. Please identify yourself and ask a question.
Hi, I'm Pauline Rell, aspiring China Watcher, and throughout your presentation you talk a lot about the differences in sort of Western correspondence experiences. I was curious if you had any insight into the experiences of quote-unquote fixers or Chinese citizen journalists and their experiences working with the Western media in China and how that has evolved as they also face increasing repression from the Chinese government.
Yeah, for those of you who didn't hear it, the question was about the Chinese assistants or fixers who work with foreign journalists. I say in the introduction to the book that I made a conscious decision not to include them in the book, simply because asking them questions would put them in their position is so sensitive. Either they would have to make stuff up or lie or be evasive. If they were straightforward about it, they would get into trouble. They're just too sensitive. So I didn't include them in the book, but there's not a single correspondent who's been based in China who will not acknowledge the crucial importance of your fixer and your interpreter. And over time, the system for using and hiring those people evolved. When I was there, they just gave you got whoever you got from the
DSB.
From the Diplomatic Service Bureau, and you were stuck with them. And sometimes they were good folks and they kind of got it, and sometimes they couldn't be bothered and there was nothing you could do about it. That parenthetically is why, for those of you who may know the name of Jaime Floracruz, Jimmy Floracruz, Cheeto Romano, Eric Bacalunao, there were these Filipino, they were left-wing students who went to China in 1971 on a friendship tour and discovered that they were on a hit list ordered by President Ferdinand Marcos. And they basically stayed thinking it would be 6 months, and it stayed till Marcos was overthrown, 15 years. And they all went to Chinese universities, became fluent in Chinese. And then when the Americans opened their news bureaus, they suddenly were sought after because they had the Chinese language skills and they knew their way around the country, but they weren't locked into all of the pressures and the baggage that your average Chinese translator. And so Eric ended up as bureau chief of NBC, Cheeto ended up as bureau chief of ABC, and then Philippine ambassador to China, sadly died last year. Jimmy ended up as CNN bureau chief, and now he's the ambassador in Beijing. I just sent him a copy of the book. But their value was partly a reflection of the fact that you didn't get this kind of help. But as time went on, it became easier to hire people, and it was one of these things where if you found somebody who was really keen, and you go to the DSB and say, put them in your system, and they would be generally cooperative. So you had an evolution towards people who were much more journalistically minded and saw themselves as journalists. We're very helpful. I don't know what your experience, John and Ron.
We could recruit openly. They were still employed through the DSB. And I think alongside everything we've discussed tonight, it's a really important question. I think the position that those Chinese nationals are in is increasingly difficult. But speaking personally and across the whole industry, they are some of the bravest, most brilliant and inspiring people I've ever met.
And they come under tremendous pressure. Their families get told your son or daughter is a traitor, they're working for foreigners. There have been any number of cases where people have been intimidated into leaving. Some who have been hired full-time, like Hayes Fan of Bloomberg News, was imprisoned. So it's very tough, but they are, even if journalists have good Chinese, they are eyes and ears into a society in a way that people who look like us can never have.
One last question is over here. No? Jan Alexander?
Hi, I'm Jan Alexander. I've been a business writer who has written about China for a long time. And the story until just a few years ago when you talked about China was often China trying to be a dominant power when it came to technology, but beyond surveillance technology, things like smart cars and all kinds of there was a Made in China 2025 campaign that was designed to have all kinds of manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing coming out of China that would
to some extent obliterate their need for all of this Western involvement in their economy, all this Western investment, and that they would, in some cases, be selling more, to be more of an importer to the West and be just more of a dominant economic to high-tech power in that sense. Is that, I mean, you're hearing less about that, and in the media mostly about, when you hear about Chinese technology, it's surveillance technology. But, you know, is that still a story that is worth looking at, just for the purpose of looking at the extent to which China is going to use its manufacturing and technological and economic power to, you know, try to overtake other, well, overtake the United States to, you know,
Dominate the
target
world.
on it as a world superpower.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely an important story, and it becomes more important in the sense how they respond to the pressure from the Americans and other countries that are denying them certain kinds of technology and what they're going to do. So yeah, it is important. I don't know. I mean, I haven't been in China in a number of years, and I'm not sort of doing daily journalism. So
Would you go to China? Would you go?
I'm not so sure I would.
Oh, interesting.
Where do you think the Hunter Biden thing is going to play out?
I don't have the slightest idea.
Do that over dinner. We're done for now. Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks very much.